never want it to come off as me being ungrateful for the opportunities I have. I can also be having the greatest time and simultaneously wishing people would stop sending me death threats.
Have you ever seen a movie collapse at the box office in such a dramatic way that people can't stop talking about it? That's exactly what happened with Disney's latest live-action Snow White remake. What was once supposed to be a bright, hopeful reboot of a classic story has now turned into one of the biggest Hollywood disasters of the year. And it's not just the low ticket sales that people are discussing, it's all the drama that swirled around the movie in the weeks leading up to its release. Viewers have been left with one burning question: how did a remake of one of Disney's most beloved films end up in such chaos? The story actually started with high hopes. Disney had been on a roll with its live-action remakes of well-known classics, like The Lion King in 2019 and Beauty and the Beast in 2017. Both those films crushed it at the box office, earning hundreds of millions of dollars during their opening weekends. They each played off audience nostalgia, but also brought modern twists. So it seemed like a no-brainer that Snow White would follow that same formula. After all, Snow White isn't just any fairy tale. It's one of Disney's very first animated hits and a film that helped lay the foundation for the entire company. If there was a surefire recipe for success, most people believe Snow White had it. But that didn't happen this time. The new Snow White remake opened in the United States with about $43 million. That might sound like a decent chunk of cash, but when you line it up against the film's reported $270 million budget, it's a crushing blow. Just for comparison, The Lion King remake made $191 million during its first weekend, and Beauty and the Beast pulled in $174 million. Snow White didn't even come close to those numbers. By its second weekend, people were already calling it the biggest flop in Disney's history. Some folks still wonder if it will ever make enough money to cover all its costs. Things only got worse when fans realized that worldwide, it scrapped by with around $87 million in that same opening stretch. In movie business terms, that is a sign of major trouble. So what happened? Many believe that a large part of the blame falls on the film's star, Rachel Zegler. Before this project, Rachel was best known for her talent in other roles, but most audiences hadn't seen her in something as big as a Disney blockbuster. At first, fans are curious and somewhat excited. A new face could bring fresh energy to a classic story. But as time went on, Rachel became the center of a non-stop controversy. She made a series of comments about the original 1937 Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Comments that many longtime Disney fans saw as insulting. She talked about not liking certain parts of the old story and even hinted that the prince was basically a creepy stalker. For people who grew up loving the sweet, old-fashioned fairy tale, these remarks came across as disrespectful. Instead of simply reimagining the classic, Rachel seemed to dismiss it as silly or outdated. That's not to say people don't want to see modern updates. Many fans don't mind small changes to older stories if it keeps them fresh, relevant, and interesting. But what made Rachel's approach so hard to swallow was her tone. In interviews, she sounded less like someone who admired Snow White and more like someone who found the original story clueless or cringeworthy. She described the prince's behavior as weird, and she questioned Snow White's role as a romantic heroine, making it sound like romance shouldn't have been part of the story at all. While everyone is entitled to their views, critics felt like she was taking aim at the heart of a beloved film that changed animation forever. Some said it was like she was too good for the role she was playing. Then there was the political drama. Rachel posted strong anti-Trump statements on social media, telling supporters of the former president that she hoped they would never know peace. Regardless of how people felt about politics, it's not usually wise for a family movie star to take such a sharp stance in public. Disney's audience is huge and diverse, and many viewers felt her comments were a direct attack on them. Soon, a whole crowd of people pledged to boycott the film, promising never to give a dime to any project connected with Rachel. In the world of entertainment, angering a large potential audience can spell disaster, especially for a movie that needs every ticket sale to pay off its giant production costs. What made it even worse is that Disney was already facing problems. Production had been delayed by an actor's strike. There were rumors of a fire on set, and the movie seemed plagued by one issue after another. Some insiders said the film's budget ballooned because of these disruptions, meaning Snow White needed to make even more money to be profitable. When Rachel's controversies blew up, it was a nightmare scenario for the studio. They had poured a ton of money into a project that now looked unsteady, all while they were also dealing with a dip in their family-friendly image. To make matters worse, negative headlines came from both sides, fans upset about the storyline changes, and fans who disagreed with Rachel's personal comments. Even Disney executives seemed to sense that they had lost control of the situation. Instead of arranging a huge red carpet premiere with plenty of press coverage, they chose to go for a smaller event with fewer media outlets present. This was very different from the big celebrations they usually host for a film of this scale. Reports hinted that the studio worried journalists might ask tough questions about all the controversies. If Rachel was put in front of too many microphones, who knew what might come out of her mouth? At that point, damage control was the name of the game. Instead of leaning into the usual hype and glitz, Disney tried to lower the film's profile. Some people involved in the production also spoke out about the messy situation. Martin Kleba, the voice of Grumpy, suggested that Rachel's actions had ruined the chance of having a big celebratory premiere. He mentioned that Disney wanted to avoid blowback from an angry public. It was sad for the many people who worked hard behind the scenes, from costume designers to special effects artists, who hoped to be proud of their final product. The overshadowing drama left their efforts in the background, which many felt was unfair. Meanwhile, critics slammed the movie's quality. Fans who saw early screenings complained that the story had strayed too far from the original, losing the charm and warmth that made Snow White so special in 1937. The online scores and audience ratings kept dropping day by day. At one point, there were rumors that it received an extremely low Rotten Tomatoes percentage, though official numbers shifted as more reviews came in. The cinema score rating landed at a B+, which might not sound awful, but for a Disney family film of this type, it was a serious disappointment. Other recent live-action remakes earned higher scores, showing that something clearly went wrong with Snow White. A big part of the frustration came from fans who believed the production team, and especially Rachel, didn't get the appeal of Snow White. The original story, though simple, had a fairy tale romance, a charming prince, and a classic villain. Most folks didn't want a total reimagining the cast, aside the central romance, or gave the prince a small, almost pointless role. Sure, modernizing certain parts can keep the story fresh, but if you reject the heart of the original, people will wonder why it's even called Snow White. Rachel's interviews seem to push this idea that traditional fairy tales are corny or too old-fashioned for modern taste. That rubbed many viewers the wrong way. Instead of thoughtful updates, it felt like a complete teardown of a classic. After the film's opening weekend results came in, Disney was in shock. The studio had to face a tough reality. They might not recoup the massive budget. People on social media joked about how a movie that cost so much could fall so hard. Some called it delicious to watch the project crumble, especially those who felt personally attacked by the lead actress's social media posts. It became a sort of grim spectacle, with folks online cheering to the movie's failure. Of course, that also led to arguments about whether it's fair to celebrate the collapse of a film that hundreds of regular workers poured their hearts into. Rumors then started circulating that Disney regrets casting Rachel. Some outlets claim the studio was thinking about ways to quietly move on from her, while others suggested she's become too controversial to hire again. Hollywood insiders speculated that her public image might be damaged beyond repair. Though she apologized for her political comments, critics said it came across as forced or insincere, like something she only did because she felt pressured. Apologies that look half-hearted don't usually satisfy the public, especially once negative momentum has built up. And that's the real tragedy here. Not too long ago, people viewed Rachel as a rising star with a promising career in front of her. She had a golden chance to become a household name if this film succeeded. But between insulting fans of the original story, calling the prince a stalker, and targeting supporters of a political figure, she ended up sparking rage from many corners. It's possible that some of these controversies got blown out of proportion. After all, we're living in a time when social media can amplify every small comment. Yet there's no denying that her tone set a certain mood, and once the internet seizes on the narrative, it's hard to reverse it. Now, with the film's failure, the question is, what does Disney do next? The company has been leaning heavily on live-action remakes as a reliable cash machine. But after a few major misses, it's clear that simply remaking an animated favorite isn't a guaranteed ticket to success anymore. Audiences seem to want more than a glossy retreat. They also want to feel like the people behind the movie respect the original material. If an actor comes off as mocking or dismissive, fans might not be as excited to buy a ticket. This moment could be a turning point for Disney. Perhaps they'll choose their future live-action costs more carefully, or maybe they'll break from remaking older classics, especially if there's a risk of losing hundreds of millions of dollars again. Another possibility is that they'll focus on brand new stories instead of trying to repackage what worked decades ago. Whatever they decide, Snow White is a wake-up call. Even the biggest brands can fail if the product doesn't resonate with the public. Meanwhile, Rachel might have to deal with the fallout in her own career. Some say she could bounce back by picking smaller roles or working on independent films that aren't tied to a mainstream studio. Others think her reputation is too toxic and that studios will avoid the risk. It's not the first time an actor has faced backlash for strong opinions, but the difference here is that her biggest movie role directly depends on pleasing a classic Disney fan base. Folks who generally want the star to respect the timeless story they love. Of course, no one can predict exactly what will happen next. Hollywood is full of comebacks and redemption arcs. Audiences sometimes have short memories when a star later delivers a fantastic performance or shows real growth. But for now, the record-breaking flop of Snow White stands as a cautionary tale. No matter how famous or beloved a brand is, if you upset the loyal core audience and a large part of the general public, your movie could be doomed before it even hits theaters. The tricky part is that the original Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs wasn't just any old cartoon. It was a groundbreaking film that helped launch Disney's global success. People have strong feelings about it because it holds nostalgic values across many generations. Sure, it's an older story with certain parts that might seem outdated, but tampering with something that has such a historic place in animation demands a delicate approach. When a leading actress seems to brush off the original film's importance or treat it like a relic that should be tossed aside, long-term fans can feel disrespected. The final question is whether the negative buzz around Rachel Zegler will fade or stick with her. In the grand scheme of Hollywood, controversies can be fleeting if the actor finds the right role or platform to show a different side. Yet, a huge part of public image comes from how a person handles setbacks. If she continues to make statements that anger large groups of people, she might become a symbol of what not to do in a publicity campaign. On the other hand, if she learns from this and approaches future roles with humility and respect, there might still be a path forward for her in the industry. For Disney, it's time to figure out what lessons they can learn. One is that simply slapping a famous brand name on a movie poster doesn't guarantee success. Another is that audience trust matters. People talk about fatigue with all the remakes, but in reality, viewers are happy to check out something familiar if it's done well. They just won't tolerate feeling talked down to or told their childhood's favorites were silly. They also don't want a lead actor to poke at them on social media over personal beliefs. It's a different entertainment landscape than it was a decade ago. One high-profile mistake can echo across the internet and scare people away from the theater. So here we are at the end of this strange and dramatic journey. What began as a promising reimagining of one of the most cherished animated films ever made has become a topic of heated debate. The box office numbers have exposed a huge gap between Disney's expectations and what the audience was willing to pay for. Rachel Zegler's politics have played a major role in fueling that gap. Now, Disney must face a harsh truth. Big budgets and fancy marketing can't save a movie if viewers decide they've been insulted or turned off. In the end, the Snow White remake isn't just a single flop. It's a sign that viewers hold more power than ever. When fans unite to reject something, even a powerhouse studio can feel it in the wallet. The fallout may reshape how Disney handles future projects. It might also shape how rising stars speak about the roles and the audiences that made them famous. Whether Rachel can repair her image remains to be seen. But if the film's performance tells us anything, it's that people care deeply about these classic stories. They want them handled with care, respect, and maybe a dash of whimsy. If that's missing, it doesn't matter how big of the budget it is, audiences won't show up. What do you think? Is Rachel Zegler just misunderstood? Or did she go too far? Should Disney scale back on live action remakes and focus on new stories? Or is there still a place for old classics done right? Let me know your thoughts, because the fallout from this movie is far from over. Whether you were turned off by the star's comments or curious about the new spin on the original fairy tale, this entire situation gives us all something to talk about. One thing is certain. The magic that once made Disney untouchable at the box office has been shaken, and it's going to take some serious work to rebuild that trust.
The winged victory came to the Louvre in pieces, and people still line up to see her. And I can only hope that despite my flaws, and despite my cracks and my breaks, and there are many of them, that at every premiere and everything I do, people will wait in line to see.